Okay, it's after 4 o'clock, so I'm going to start. First of all, thank you everybody for joining us for this multi-track masterclass. And the title is brilliant title for audio drama because that's what it's about. Show Don't Tell, world building in audio fiction with Eira Major, who is the person that you can see in the screen. Wave, Eira, so everybody can see you.
Hello.
Right, so thank you everybody. Oh, there's more people. Sorry, this is going to be a bit like this for the beginning. Just to say who I am, my name's Caroline Raphael. So I'm former head of audio drama for the BBC, and after that, for 17 years, I commissioned drama and comedy for Radio 4. Left about 10 years ago, and I'm now working as an independent producer. I teach creative writing, particularly audio drama, and work as an audio producer. And so, Eira, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Eira. I make audio dramas, mostly under the moniker of Hanging Sloth. You may have seen my stuff around. I started making audio drama 4 years ago, and I've now made 150 episodes, a bit over that now, actually, since the last count. And I'm going to be showing you a little clip from one of my shows, Not Quite Dead, which is a show about vampires.
Excellent. That's a lot of audio drama. Right. So for those of you who haven't done one of these before, this is how it's going to work. So in a minute, I'm going to ask Eira to give us a bit of context so that we know where we are when we as we start the drama. Then we're going to listen. It's about 21 minutes long. I'm going to ask you, and I'll remind you again, to turn off your video, turn off your microphones, and just get yourself into the sort of place, happy place where you're happy to and will enjoy listening to an audio drama. When it's finished, we've got lots of times for questions. I've got quite a few questions I'm very keen to answer, but I want to know don't want to answer, that's a slip, I want to ask. But this is really a time for you, for the questions that you'd like to ask. What I'm going to ask and suggest is that we're going to ask you to put your questions into chat, but I'm going to ask you, if possible, can you listen and put your questions in afterwards so that you're focusing on and listening to the audio drama. For those who just joined, can I just remind you that we are recording this session? So I've got the audio lined up. Yes. That might take a second because I have to do that sharing audio thing, which always takes me a minute. So I'm going to ask people to turn off their cameras and their microphones. And then, Eira, can you start by telling us what it is we're going to listen and a little bit that we need to know to fully appreciate where we've arrived in the story? That would be lovely.
Yes, of course. So we're going to be listening to a clip from the season 3 finale of Not Quite Dead, which, as I mentioned before, is a show about vampires. We come in about halfway through the episode where the main character, Alfie, who is for most of the time the single narrator of the show, has just rescued Nej from a facility where he's been being experimented on. Nej and Alfie are both vampires, and they're in a kind of complicated situationship. At the opening of this clip, Nej is incapacitated and Alfie is heading out to their car to gather their things and hopefully try to plan their next steps of escape.
Excellent. Right. So I am going to share my sound.
Yep, no worries.
Right, I'm going to start it again.
I didn't.
Can you hear that?
But
yep.
Once I'd let him drink from me, he wouldn't stop screaming. The smallest bit of energy, and he just used it to scream and try to kill me. I had to fucking gag him. I was scared he was going to wake up and bite me as I carried him. In fairness to me, he chewed through that fucking cloth I tied into his mouth within 2 hours, despite being barely conscious at all, so it's a valid worry. If the cloth hadn't been there, that would have been my neck. I've got him tied to the bed now. Ankles and wrists. I have tried to pad out the belts I used with t-shirts and socks I found in the clothes drawers, but he's still hurting himself. It's not intentional, it's just instinct. Every time he gets a bit more conscious, he just thrashes. I'm pretty sure both his shoulders are dislocated. It's the drive to kill. He has to get free so he can hunt, so he can heal, but there's nobody here to hunt except me, and I don't want to go out like that. There's nothing I can do. If he bites me again, he'll kill me. If I bite him, he's definitely dead. That room, what they did. In my stolen scrubs, it was pretty easy to get through the building. I spotted a woman who was also in scrubs, talking on her phone, almost as soon as I got inside. She held open a keycard-controlled lift for me to follow her inside. She was talking to her kid, I think, telling her she'd be home before she had to go to school in the morning, that she was sorry she'd missed bedtime again. I almost feel bad for what I did to her. "Hey, for the extraction?" she asked me as we stepped out of the lift. It was a long hallway lit with cold strip lights. There were white doors with small observation windows at eye level. Each one had a patient code and a chart stuck underneath. No names, just numbers. As we walked down the corridor, I glanced through the windows. Some of them were half-maids. They were either missing arms entirely or had them strapped to their sides. They stood as close to the doors as they could, murky eyes staring through the slots, though of course they couldn't see. Other rooms held either full vampires or humans in hospital gowns. I couldn't tell you which because the doors were all vacuum sealed and no one was coming in or out of them. Some of them, too, stood with their eyes towards the observation windows, only the slightest suggestion they had any more awareness than the half-maids. Some of them were hunched in corners. There were no beds, no chairs for them to lie on. They clung to their knees, rocking, barefoot, back and forth. The only movement in the corridor itself was around two double doors at the end. "Exciting, isn't it?" the woman asked me. "Yeah," I said. "I normally work at the Edinburgh operation. Where have they shipped you in from?" "York," I said. The woman gasped excitedly. "Oh, that's amazing. You've got so much hands-on experience with this kind of thing. I'm so glad to have you. It must be great to get stuck back in. I know you've all been on lockdown since the incident in the spring. It's such a shame about all your ongoing projects." "Yeah, really frustrating," I said. "I'm just hoping the hypothesis is right," said the woman. She held open one of the double doors. The smell of Nej was everywhere. Everywhere. It hit me like a punch in the face. He was in the centre of the room, and I couldn't tell how bad it was at first because he was covered with surgical sheeting. The woman who let me in went over to the sink in the corner to wash her hands alongside another person in scrubs. "Joanna," he said, delightedly. "Hi," she said. "Long time no see." "Is this someone else from Edinburgh?" the man said, nodding at me. His eyes crinkled like he was smiling under his surgical mask. "No," I said. "That's right," said Joanna. "He's from York." I was only half listening to Joanna, though, because I'd taken a couple of steps towards the sinks, and in doing so, I placed myself directly at the base of the operating table. A small pump was whirring. 5 thick gauge lines ran from it, dark red inside clear tubing. Nej's blood. They were extracting his fucking blood. I was shaking. I took half a step towards him, knocking into a small table of surgical supplies. The equipment laid out was all familiar, but the scalpels had pale ivory blades. I peered closer. Vampire teeth. They had made scalpels out of our own fucking teeth, so that their incisions would take longer to close. I was so angry, I couldn't feel my face or my hands. I couldn't move. I didn't even think about what I was going to do next, beyond noting that there were 8 people in the room. 6 of them were distracted. 1 of them had her hands inside of Nej's chest. "You alright?" asked Joanna. "Yeah," I said, though I absolutely fucking wasn't. "Sorry, what did you say your name was?" she asked. "Alfie," I said. I took off my mask. "My name is Alfie." There was a confused moment of quiet from Joanna and her friend by the sink. I turned my back to the room and went over to the door. It had looked heavy as Joanna held it open to let me follow her inside, and it was. A lot of operating theatres have doors like that. It's so that a vulnerable patient is less likely to die in a fire should one break out. These doors also have emergency bolts at the bottom in case there's an intruder that you and your patient need to be protected from. Oh, irony is sweet. I bent over and I bolted the door fucking shut. I stood up slowly. "What are you doing?" said Joanna. And that is the last thing she ever fucking said. I honestly don't know. I don't know how. I remember moving, but it was like I felt nothing. I just moved. The heat of their insides on my palms, between my fingers, the give of their skin under my teeth, the rush of their blood spilling over my tongue, flavours mixing, spinning out. I remember the clatter of surgical instruments, choked off screams, and the thud of the door slamming open as one of them finally wrenched the lock open and made it out of the room. They didn't get far. I'd fucked them up too much for that, but they got far enough to trigger an alarm. I slammed into his back with my foot. I felt his ribs crack. When he screamed, it bubbled out of him, like he was face down in shallow water. The alarms were so loud, I could feel them in my bones. Back in the theatre, when I walked back in, I saw it. What I had done to those people. Their eyes looking up at me, hollow, heads barely on, necks. Some of them were just about breathing still, wet, thick, guttural. I didn't fucking care. I was glad. I don't... The machine Neige was hooked up to, I pulled the lines out of it, blood spilling cold over my hands. I caught as much as I could by drinking it, folding the lines in my hands to stem the flow. It tasted wrong, it tasted strange. Drugs, barbiturates, they were making me spin. I went to the operating table and I pulled the sheets aside and he was cut. Like Casper had been cut. Throat to pelvis. His sternum, I couldn't think. The alarms were so fucking loud. There was surgical wire. I wound it around his sternum. I pulled it shut, folded the skin back and stapled. It was a fucking mess, but it didn't have time. Fuck. The alarms were so loud, so fucking loud. I disconnected him from the lines. They were still half full of blood. I drank as much as I could out of them. I could taste the drugs they'd pumped him with, what they were, what the dose must have been. I knew if I drank much more, it'd make me woozy, and I needed to be sharp. I couldn't. I had to fucking get him out. I went back to the machine itself. His blood was being collected into a series of flasks. There didn't seem to be enough of them to hold everything he was missing, but I couldn't see any others. I couldn't drink it, and he was too heavily sedated to, so I just kind of lost it. Like I hadn't already killed a room full of people, but everything that looked like it might have his blood in it. Cabinets, fridges, machinery. I started pulling objects over, kicking it to shit. Just fuck. They don't get it. They don't get to fucking keep it. The blood in the machine, I pulled the vials out, poured them into Nesh's mouth. He was so still. Horrifically still. When the blood touched his mouth, though, his eyes split open. He drank, pulling on the restraints I hadn't realised he was locked in. I was so focused on the lines, his blood, the machine. I needed to get him out. I needed a key card. I fumbled on one of the bodies on the floor, pulled out the bloody lanyard. The doors burst open, and there was this hot, sharp pain, like fire in my chest. I flew backwards, away from Neige. They shot me. They fucking shot me. Once, twice, 3 times. I was bleeding. I was aching. All the blood from the people I'd just killed, it didn't matter. I was fucking on the edge of sanity in 1 minute, maybe 2, and I couldn't even see. I was possessed. I just moved. Animal, absent. Why would they? Fucking stupid idiots. Like, I didn't need to think. It just happened, and most of them were dead. I think they shot me more. I don't know really. But I ended up on my knees. A man in a bulletproof vest was holding a gun to my head. Others were trying to pass us to get to Nej, and it occurred to me then, in that moment, that if I didn't do anything, we were going to die. I leapt to my feet, slammed the lanyard against the black box beside one of the doors in the corridor. It buzzed and I shoved it open, shrinking against the wall as the stinking, growling husk behind it shambled forwards. I swiped the keycard against another door and another, flinging them wide as I ran. If it wasn't chaos already, it was chaos after that. Bullets rang out, their casing like bright bells as they struck the floor, cutting through the relentless, swelling ringing of the alarms blaring out around us. They weren't shooting at me anymore, they were shooting at them, the things coming out of some of the rooms I'd unlocked. The half-maid reacted to the bullets even less than I did, not slowing in loping strides, arms reaching out to the people holding rifles towards them, skins sloughing half from bone. I shoved the whole table Neige was on towards the lift. As the doors slid shut behind us, one of the people with guns pointed it at me. And they shot me in the head. And it was... I felt the crack of it. Everything went dark. When I came back to myself, I was in the lift with Neige, and there were bits of people on me. I was looking at my hands and I felt far away from myself. I felt electrified, like my whole body was vibrating, like I could spring forward like a coil. The doors on the lift opened. The alarms were still ringing, but there was no sign that anyone was coming this time. I could hear gunfire. I pulled Neige's restraints off. He was semi-conscious, mumbling words in dead languages, and I... What is that smell? Oh my god. The car is on fire. Shit. Shit. They found us. Shit. Stop shooting at me. Ah! Oh, fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you. Oh, Christ, what is your fucking problem? Jesus, fuck. Fuck. My fucking shoulder. Christ. Fuck, stop shaking. Stop shaking. That's everything out of the car. It's me. I know, I just need to... Shut up. Neige, no, please let go. It's okay. Oui, femme. Autre chambre, femme. C'est pas. In there. Oh, don't bite me. If you bite me, I will fucking... Neige, not me. Neige, them. Oh, danger.
Come here.
It's dead.
C'est tellement...
Oh!
Ça répond. Alfie, mon cœur. Mon cœur.
Nash.
Oui, oui. Avai. I did not mean to hurt you. I'm sorry, little love.
Thank you, thank you. Shh, thank you.
I have you. Come to me. Alfie, my love. Where the fuck are we?
I don't know exactly. Somewhere in the north of Scotland.
Okay. Where's our love? Are more of them coming? The men with guns, bijou. Will there be more?
Yeah, I think so, yes.
Merde.
I'm sorry.
Non. C'est bon, little love. Ah. My head is still not clear. They're coming fast, I think. Oui.
Yeah.
What is the time? The time, mon petit, come on.
11 at
Bien.
night.
Très bien. Alfie, you are so good. You are doing so good. Come on now, little love. Move on your feet.
What?
We cannot stay. Come on. Clothes. Are there clothes here?
Yeah,
D'accord.
look at the car. They burned the car.
Merde. Putain de merde. Do not worry. There is an alternative.
I checked. There isn't.
Put this on.
I'm covered in. We're both covered in blood.
It does not matter. I think we will be out of sight most of the way, depending on the... I think it is only a few miles to the sea. Don't worry. Alfie, look at me. I love you. It is going to be okay. I'm going to keep you safe.
Okay. Where are we gonna go?
Somewhere safe eventually, but first, anywhere that is not here. What is this?
It's the stuff from Cass's car.
Okay, good. You keep hold of that. Come on.
We can't walk. It's too. The car is on fire.
In here. Bonjour, cheval. C'est très beau. Oui.
Are you fucking serious?
The car is on fire. This will have to
I
kill.
don't know how to ride a fucking horse.
Lucky for you, I do. Now, come on. Calme. Les yeux, non. Calme.
You didn't put on a saddle.
I learned to ride before then. Always finally get in the way. Especially with two of us. You're strong enough. Come on.
Nesh, I can't.
You what?
I don't know.
If we stay here, Elsie, we are going to die. There is no alternative to this. You have two options. Die, or you come with me, and you get to start whatever vampire revolution you want.
What are you talking about?
What you have been saying between the lines, Elfie. What happened to me? What happened to Casper? We cannot let this happen again. We have to change something. And to do that, we have to leave right now.
I'm scared.
Do you want to die or do you want to change the fucking world, eh?
I don't want to die.
Okay then. Give me your hand.
You're insane.
Quite possibly.
I'm insane.
Oui. This I know for certain.
Fuck, I love you.
Oui. I know.
Goodness. very, very intense, very vivid piece. Thank you, Eira, for choosing that. And again, can I apologize? I don't know what happened when we lost the sound, but we got it back. So that's the main thing. So if you would like to put your questions into the chat, we'll get a few coming in, and then I will read them out, and Eira's going to answer them. I want to start though. Something which I quite deliberately didn't raise at the beginning, but I think it would be fair to say that you perform in this, you wrote it, you also produced it. Is
Yes.
that right?
Yes, it is.
And as a process, how do you find that? Because that is intense.
Yeah, it is pretty intense. And it's got advantages and disadvantages to it. I really like being able to control all the different aspects of it, and Not Quite Dead is a very specific case. The show I was working on right before I started making Not Quite Dead, Spirit Box Radio, had a cast of 27 people. I still was performing in it and did all of the editing and all the writing, but working with a larger cast was like a really different experience. But Not Quite Dead was, it started off as like a project mostly just for me. So kind of out of necessity, it's about challenging myself and pushing myself to move in different directions. And yeah, so it is deliberately that intense, if that makes sense.
Is there a point where you start to share it, whether it's script stage or during post-production?
So yeah, most of the time nobody sees my work until I'm like actually sharing it out with the world, until I'm publishing it live, and that's especially true with Not Quite Dead. Not Quite Dead, I was feeling kind of sad about the other thing I was making at the time. And I was like, I just want to make something that's really for me and that's really motivated for me. And I started releasing it pretty much as soon as I got the idea of it. And so I was writing it and then producing it on like an episode by episode basis, which isn't normally how I operate at all. I'm normally I'm a planner by nature. And yeah.
Yeah, sorry, can I stop you there? Because
Yeah.
that's really interesting. So did you know how the story was going to end? Because dare I say, you know, there are great people like Dickens, Hardy, they release their novels in episodes, it's were. But so you started, did you know how you were going to end? Because that's a lot of pressure if you're working on it as it goes along. I'm fascinated.
I had like a sort of idea in my head of where I wanted to end up with it, and I had a few possibilities for the direction that the show could go in, and I was trying not to put too much on myself to commit to anything and to just kind of go where the story felt like it wanted to. By the time I was writing, I think episode 5 of the first season, I knew how I was going to end season 2, which meant well, I had an idea. I was like, and which meant I had to make some commitments about what I was going to do with the rest of season 1. And it's been nice with this season. The one the clip we just listened to is part of season 3, and by that point, I knew how I was ending the show. So it had taken on a different sort of creative shape, but it's really been a process that's evolved with Not Quite Dead.
Wow, I think that's high risk, but really interesting. Just one more from me. Questions are coming in, so thank you, everybody. Keep them coming. I suppose obviously you are a born storyteller.
Thank you.
Why audio drama as a way of telling stories?
So I started making audio drama in COVID, and the first audio drama I made was a show called Clockwork Bird. It's very rough around the edges. Not Quite Dead, I think, it's like it has these rough moments to it because of how I make it. But Clockwork Bird, it's like very much somebody learning how to do sound design, somebody learning how to do soundscaping, and it had originally been a novel. And I thought, I listened to a couple of audio dramas and I was like, I would really love to see this story take this shape. And I said to myself, if I write 5 episodes of this script and I can rope in my housemates and my family members into performing in this thing, I'll make it. and yeah, and then I ended up doing it. So it was just curiosity. It began as a writing exercise. Basically, I was like, well, if I'm restricting myself to just what you can hear, and losing so many things about like that you get in a novel in terms of the interiority of the characters, how do you deal with that in audio drama? So it began as a writing exercise more than anything, and now, yeah.
Wow. And remind us, so starts to write it, how many hours have you produced of audio drama? Remind us what you said at the beginning.
Oh, I don't know how many hours, but it's well over 150 episodes at this point.
Episodes.
Yeah, Spirit Box
Goodness.
Radio is over 40 hours, I want to say, about 40
Right.
hours on its own. So
So this is it. This is
yeah.
it. Right. I'm going to go to some of the questions. So I'm going to do them in order because I think that's kind of easy. Yeah, what drew you to a vampire story?
So I've been obsessed with vampires pretty much my whole adult life and through most of my adolescence. I got really interested in vampires pre-Twilight, and then Twilight came out, and I was like, this is a really different way to think about these. And I, because of how my brain works, I became fixated on like a lot of vampire stories will do this thing where they start to explain the science of how their bodies work, and they never follow it through because vampires, physically they don't really work. So you have to stop at some point, and most stories stop at too early a point for me, and I'm left going, oh, well, why haven't you done that? So when I was about 14, I started writing this sort of like logical, scientific explanation of how vampires work. And Not Quite Dead, it kind of grew out of those masses and
Yeah.
masses of notes that I had. So
Excellent. V is asking, hi, Eira. Do you think the story would be different if you used a different medium with this or with anything else?
Yes, absolutely. So I am foremost a prose writer, and I still write novels now. And there's such different processes. But every time I start a project and I think, oh, I actually want to see this to completion, I sit down and I'll write it in two ways. I'll start writing it as a script, and I'll start writing it as a novel and be like, what shape does this want to be? And there's some ideas where it's really obvious, where it's like, well, this is something that's meant for this format. So my show Spirit Box Radio is a fake radio show, for example. So that's like designed to be an audio drama, and writing for audio in that specific way where you're privileging the medium, I guess, is a really exciting thing to do because it gives you all of these possibilities to play with the actual format that you're using, which I found really exciting and really satisfying as a writer. But absolutely, things have a totally different shape for me if I'm writing them in prose versus as I'm writing them in audio drama.
So coming on to sound, a really good question from Emma Smith. So what's your process for sound design? Do you create your own sound effects? And perhaps could just draw in here about what systems you use? What are your favorite bits of software? But the first thing is, yeah, what's your process, and do you create them yourself?
So I do a combination of things. So one of the reasons I chose this clip is because it's one of these episodes where I'm using a combination of a bunch of stuff where I've done like Foley, where I've recorded myself moving around, and I've also used Creative Commons Zero license stuff that you can find on the internet, which takes a long time. So I have like this whole bank of stored up Zero license sound effects that I have saved on my computer. And I spend some time like combing through those, and I end up using a lot of sound effects that people load up that are not for the use that they're supposed to be. Like people will say that it's a tap, but it doesn't sound like a tap to me, and I like process it down and strip off the high notes and make it into the sound of a river, for example. And yeah, so I use a combination of different techniques. Yeah.
And the systems you're using, the software?
Everyone's going to laugh at me for this. So a bit of context for this is that I used to make music. And so when I came to making audio drama, I was like, I have no idea where to start. I don't know what to do with all of my processes. And I have tried to switch to another workspace, and it's just not worked for me. But I make all of my audio drama in GarageBand, would you believe?
No, I have heard that from others, and often
Yeah.
one, because it's the software. A lot of people, whether you want it or not, it's on your system, but that's where they've come out. And yeah, carry on. Why change?
Yeah.
So Hero said, "Hi, I love the clip. What drew you to audio fiction in particular? And perhaps a specific challenge that you can think of, particularly for those who might be thinking about it for the very first time. You can think back to when you first did it."
So I think what drew me to audio fiction is that you kind of have control. You can, as an indie producer, have control over all stages of the process. And I'm a pretty extreme version of that. Most people do not approach this problem the way I do, which is to be like, oh, I'll do all of it, which is it's a very novelist's approach, I think, to solving this as a problem. And I think that a specific challenge is working with other voice actors, and I would love to do that again. I'm not currently doing that, but it's a great opportunity, because they add another layer of meaning in their performances. They can pull things out of characters that you as a writer and a director never even anticipated was there, and that's a really fascinating and beautiful thing. But it can be really challenging. It can change the direction of a scene entirely and create something which you don't expect, which is a fabulous thing to happen for you as a creator working with your own writing. That's a fantastic thing.
So going back to recording, V's asking, how do you record the vocals and how do you maintain your energy? And yes, we'll do that one first.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, just so you're Nej and you're Alfie.
I am both of them, yeah.
Right.
And
can I just say, I think that was rather brilliant because I didn't spot that, and I've got pretty bat-like hearing, so that's impressive. So you are talking to yourself.
Yeah, I am. So I don't sit there and I don't go, because Alfie his register's a little bit higher than mine, so he speaks up here, and Nej's obviously he's down here. But I have experience of a little bit of classical singing training, which helps with like all those kind of performance modulations. But I record one half of the conversation and then the other half of the conversation. And I usually start with Alfie, with Not Quite Dead, and then wearing myself out doing all of Alfie's anxiety really adds to the gruffness of Nej's voice. So I tend to record them like that. So I'll do 2 episodes, or I'll do Alfie, then Nej. And yeah, I find it's really helpful. And with maintaining the energy, so this episode that you just heard a clip from was actually really challenging for that, because Alfie's quite an anxious guy, as you probably got the impression. But normally his spats of anxiety are quite short. So in audio drama, time kind of has this elastic quality. So if you focus down on a moment, it can feel much, much longer than it is. So to have a convincing panic attack in audio drama, for example, you only normally need like 40 to 45 seconds of that actual anxiety. But what was challenging about that episode was that he's that level of anxious for an entire 40-minute episode. And it was really physically exhausting. And I think I drank 3 Monster Energy drinks through the process of recording that. It was a really, really long day. And I was like physically sore afterwards. I was really surprised. But the way that I do it, it sounds really daft, but is not focusing on the performance and focusing instead on the character. A thing that I found when I started doing voice acting was that I'd get really in my head about it and think a lot about how I was sounding. But I always do better if I don't think about that at all and just try and get into the character's headspace, and then I find I don't lose momentum.
Thank you. Jazz is asking, what is something you think works but Not Quite Dead that doesn't work in other vampire media? And was there a particular niche that you were trying to fill?
Yeah, there absolutely was a particular niche I was attempting to fill. So vampires in pop culture and media, they kind of represent eroticism, and more broadly horror monsters and villains. They're kind of the erotic other, if you like. And there's loads of different ways that this can be read. But if you take vampires in particular back to their roots, you think about stuff like Carmilla and Dracula, for example, as like the 2 seminal pieces of early vampire literature. Both of them are really deeply queer texts. And so I wanted to write something that was like about vampires owning that monstrousness. And instead of the otherness being what makes them terrible, being the thing that kind of humanizes them in the end. So we don't actually get a lot of that dynamic between Alfie and Nej coming through in that clip that we just heard. But a lot of it is giving each other the safety to be like monstrous with one another. And so it's kind of like it's supposed to be this exploration of vampires as othered bodies, which is kind of what I'm going for with Not Quite Dead. That's the niche I'm attempting to fill.
Excellent. Oliver Morris is also recommending Humble Bundles. I hope I've said that right. Humble Bundle and Free Sound are good resources for sound effects. On the sound effects, do you ever go out and collect any? Do you go out with a Zoom or actually your phone with a decent recorder on your phone to actually record sounds?
Yeah, sometimes I do. I'll go on a little mission where I need to get like a specific sound. I went out, for Spirit Box Radio in particular, there was some stuff that just didn't exist in online libraries, so I'd like go out at night to the local park and record myself like standing really specifically on a twig and things like that. And sounds in bathrooms, like turning taps, it's really hard to get the exact sounds that you want. And everyone's got a bathroom, so why don't you do it? So I'll do little things like that quite often.
Something that struck me that you said is that the sound, just because it's a real sound doesn't mean it's what the sound will sound like in an audio drama.
Yeah.
And I do remember that being surprised when I first started producing audio drama. Why are you using that rather than the real thing? But yes, and because sound isn't just, and I'm interested in your thoughts about this, Eira, sound it's also the emotion of the sound. Just because it's the real sound, the impact you want it to have on the character or on the scene means that actually you might want to heighten it. You talked about processing sound.
Yeah, so sometimes I will cut out the top end of a specific sound to make it sound different, or I'll process it in a different way. I always think of this moment I had in an episode of Spirit Box Radio with a knife, where I suddenly realized that the sound of a held knife is nothing. It sounds like nothing. So this is a really impactful moment that in a visual medium or in a book it would really hit, but in an audio drama it just doesn't work because you can't see the knife and a knife sounds like nothing in your hand. And yeah, it's interesting what you say because it's about the emotion of the sound, and I think that's absolutely right, where you really want to focus in on stuff. And I think that the best audio dramas, and really where I found myself like becoming a better sound designer, has been taking things on and taking things off in sound the way that you would control props on a stage. And it's better to kind of think of sound in audio drama as props rather than just like a soundscape. I think it's tempting, and I certainly attempted to do this in Clockwork Bird, to attempt to basically realistically relive an entire sound journey. And you'll hear Foley designers for films talk a lot about how they record things like that, and they build like a noise journey across a scene, and they follow a character across the space, and you want the jacket rustling and the trousers and all of that. But in audio drama, it's a much more controlled space, and I think the level of the suspension of disbelief is different in audio drama, I think, most of the time, and that can really vary show to show, so I won't get too hung up on that. But I think it's best to think of it as props that you're bringing on and off, and so you can really focus in on a sound. And so if you're doing that, like really, like if you want to highlight the moment that two people hug, like in real life that doesn't really sound like much, but you add a lot of like clothes rustling, several layers of that sound, and then you can hear the two people coming together. You really elevate that moment.
Absolutely. So what did you do? You mentioned the knife. What did you do in the end with the knife?
I can't even remember how I dealt with the problem. I think I went back, and it was like a huge problem because this person walks in with this knife, and it was a really pivotal moment in the scene, and they had the knife. And in the end, I had her throwing it, which really changed the pace and the rhythm of the scene, because it's like it's a much more overt threat that if someone's throwing the knife. And so if you can hear her like throwing it up and down, and then it becomes apparent that she has the knife in her hand. But it really changed the tone of the moment, I think.
Excellent. So, yes, Blue Tangerine is asking, please, can you tell us something about how you compose the music and what that process is?
So I don't really know. I can't really say much about the process of composing music at all. So Not Quite Dead, most of the time it only has 2 pieces of music that I composed at the very beginning, which is the opening and the outro. But the finales have free to use open source, like like royalty-free music at the end of each finale, and that was a bit of Creatures of Prometheus that we hear at the end, which is also what the episode is titled. But a lot of my other shows have quite a lot of really synthy music in them. And it's like making music is not something I find very easy to talk about, I'm afraid, because it's an intuitive process, and especially the show I'm making at the moment, Remnants. I don't exactly score every episode, but it's essentially that process where I'm going through, and it's kind of like just following the mood of the scene. So it's really really emotional and intuitive, and I don't know that I could be very helpful about putting it in.
That's all right. So Jazz is asking, again, it's coming back to this unique challenges. What is unique about audio fiction compared to, say, as you're also a novel writer?
Okay, so you can, to an extent, so firstly, audio drama offers you this extra level of storytelling, which doesn't exist in novel writing, which I think is really interesting, where you can use silence in a way that you can't in the same way in a book. And you have this, as well as existing as like the words that the characters are saying, it also exists in time. So you can hold someone in a moment of silence where nothing is going on. You just hold them there, and that's like a really powerful thing. That's like, it's really special to audio drama and something I really like. And an effective use of silence and moments of quiet is something that I really aspire towards in my work. And yes, I think that's one thing that's really special about audio drama, and the whole level of being able to sound design stuff does as this extra level of storytelling that you can do that's almost incidental but still very deliberate. As opposed to novel writing, there's a lot of restrictions on it that don't exist. And I think that writing for audio drama, for any writer who's writing fiction, I think giving it a go and seeing how it changes things, if you have to limit yourself to just the audio medium, I think that's really important. I had a friend whose script I read through a while back, and they had written a scene, and at the end of the scene, a man collapses on this beautiful Persian rug. And I was like, that's great as an image. We can't hear the rug. So it limits you like that. And how you get across interiority is a really big challenge in audio drama. You have 2 challenges like with audio drama. It's like when to tell and when to show, which is the reason I picked this clip of Not Quite Dead, actually, is because we have this moment where we go from talking about the past, where he's recounting previous events, where we get quite a lot of his interiority, quite a lot of his thoughts and how he felt about the scene. And what that does, as opposed to in a novel where you can kind of like be like, oh, is it objective or subjective? You can't really tell. With Alfie in Not Quite Dead, it's definitely subjective. The things he's choosing to tell you are the things he is choosing to pull out of the memory. And he's like necessarily unreliable in a way that is true of some narrators in novels, but not always. And then you have that moment where it moves from looking back to the present moment of action, where you get the objective truth. And that contrast between the extreme subjectivity of what Alfie has told you about the situation versus the cold reality of being chased back down the path and getting nudged to kill all of those people, basically. And that's like, being able to move between those modes and how you do that is really challenging, but it's one of the most powerful things about audio drama for me, I think.
It's why I particularly like that clip that you played, is because those levels of different voices an inner voice, a narrative voice? Is it in the present? Is it looking back? And then that moment you choose to move to something more active. I mean, those are so essentials about audio drama. And I think as a writer, finding that different level is very, very exciting. So M. Smith's got a question actually I wanted to ask you, because I think it's true for anybody working within podcasts, is any tips on how you promote your audio drama and actually building your listenership?
So the rule number one is make a good thing about promoting your stuff. Make a good thing, make it the best thing that it can be for you, and then be bold and put it out into the world. How you promote that and build that is like, it's going to be so specific case by case, and it's something that I really, really struggle with. I find it really, really challenging. I would say that it's really important to early on know how much of yourself you're going to share and be really firm about those boundaries, and like understand that it's an evolving process. So yeah, I think that it's probably the thing that you should do is reach out to other creators, because like generally speaking, people in the audio drama space will be looking for other people to swap trailers with and swap endorsements with, and that's like the best thing that you can do for your show when you're an indie producer with no connections in the space, is to reach out to other creators and see if they're interested in doing trailer swaps, where you just stick each other's trailer on the end of each other's episodes, and that's like you promote each other's work. And it's particularly useful if you're reaching out to people whose work has inspired yours, or whose work you think is similar to yours and you find enjoyable. Sometimes people will say no, but sometimes they say yes, so it's always worth asking. And it's yeah, the worst thing that can happen is that people will say no. But yeah, using that space that's available to you, like once you start making something and putting it out, you will suddenly find that lots of people are very willing to swap with you, because they're all trying to promote their shows too.
Oh, it's a very, very generous community. So this is on Rusty Quill as a platform. Can you tell us something about that and how you got involved with them?
Yeah, so my shows are all networked with Rusty Quill, so they don't have any involvement in any of my writing or production. I'm still a completely indie creator. They don't tell me what to do, basically. And I started speaking to them several months before I got on board with the platform. So essentially what they do is they take a cut of my ad revenue in exchange for promoting my work. So it's like a much more, because they're a much larger entity than I am, they have much more access and much more influence with people, so they can help get your trailer on shows that are more like your show, so that the people who are listening are more likely to like your stuff. And yeah, they really help with like outreach and finding other people and helping you grow your audience. And that's kind of the role of networks. But it's what a network is gonna, it's different between each network as far as I know. I know some other people who are involved in other audio drama networks, and because it's quite a small space and quite a young space as well, there's no like standard for what a network is going to be doing, and each one has a different thing. So it's worth like looking around and speaking to different networks, which is what I did before I ended up deciding to sign up with Rusty Quill. It's like speaking to multiple people and finding what's going to work best for you.
That's very good advice. And I would also suggest to people listening that make sure that you understand who ends up owning the project, that you're not giving any right. I'm not suggesting any of the platforms will, but it's always checking that this is my show and I hold on to the rights, and I can do what I want with it.
Yeah, my little handy tip for any kind of process like that is don't sign anything on the day it's offered to you, ever. Always ask for at least a couple of days, because then you give yourself a cool down space and you can reread through everything on your own time at your own pace. And that's like crucially important, to make sure that you're not agreeing to anything that you would want to agree to in a hurry.
Mm.
It's not going to go away. The best offers, if it's actually a good and decent offer, it's not going to dissolve overnight. Take your time with it.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly wise advice, probably good advice for life as well.
Yeah.
So MK is asking, you run your own studio and you say Not Quite Dead was just for fun and ended up being loved by listeners and Tumblr. So do you rely on Patreon? You've talked about the ads. Are there other ways of raising funds? And I suppose if one's going to be absolutely brutal about this, make an income from it.
Yeah. Okay. So to be totally real
Yeah.
about audio drama, it's incredibly difficult to make money in audio drama.
Mm.
I'm only able to do what I'm currently doing because I started making my audio dramas when I still had a full-time job, and I've only basically been able to do what I've been doing as a full-time creator because I did an MA and worked 2 jobs whilst I did the MA, and one of those
Mm.
jobs gave me free accommodation. So it's a really specific set of circumstances that have enabled me to do what I'm doing. It's really, really hard to make an income, and it takes a really, really long time. I've been doing this for 4 years, and I'm only getting to a point now where my income is like approaching sustainable. It's really, really difficult. You have to be creative, and for a long time I relied on creatively looking out for grants and people who are looking to offer money to new businesses, and creative funds and things like that. A lot of people I know were getting funding through the arts councils across the UK. That situation is a little bit complicated at the moment. I don't know the details about how, but I know that it's just become more difficult for everybody to get more funding. And so it's a really difficult space. You know, it's like anything creative really, is that you also have to be really lucky, and I have been, and I'm really grateful for it. Yeah, so I try to keep my income diverse. So I have a Patreon and I make money from ads, and I made some money in advance on Remnants, and I also in the past have done crowdfunders, but they are what I would say about like those crowdfunders that you see like Indiegogo and Kickstarter campaigns. Unless you already have a significant platform, they're really, really difficult to run, and they're incredibly emotionally draining. So I would advise anybody considering running a crowdfunder to spend some time doing it for fun first before you pursue that route, and make sure that you have people doing it with you when you're doing crowdfunding. Like I make audio drama all the time. I could do this, you know, I do this all the time. I have a really high creative output, and it's a lot of work, and I do like 60-hour weeks often, but crowdfunding is the single most draining thing that I have ever done. So I would say be prepared for that.
Thank you. So wise words, and also thank you for your honesty about what the situation is like. Just picked up on something you said, which is interesting. You called audio drama a young space.
Yeah.
So I wonder whether there are any particular challenges, unique challenges.
Yeah, well,
that sort of come with that.
I think part of the problem with it being like viable as like as a creative space in terms of how you make money is the fact that it's such a young industry. And I think what's really interesting is speaking to somebody like you who's been involved in the industry for so long. It's like, you know, it feels to a lot of us creating now that this has just sprung up out of nowhere, but that's really not true. I have a friend who, I believe those of you who are doing the multi-track thing will have spoken to Ella already, who knows an awful lot about the history of radio drama and how that is kind of the foundation for what audio drama now is. But the modern audio drama space, like that's kind of this subset of podcasting, is kind of treated like the weird cousin of more standard podcasting space, and that's reflected in how podcast festivals treat audio drama, when there's like very little coverage and you only really hear stuff about the really big shows. And that's just because it's, you know, we're a small and growing space, and over time that's going to change, and it's really felt like it has started to already. But I think at the moment, big businesses, big corporations, and, you know, funding bodies, they don't really know what to do with audio drama yet. And I think over time they're going to start figuring that out. And I think that's one of the challenges, like money wise. But yeah.
I mean, others on the chat, please join in if you've got more information about this. But I think that yes, it is a very old medium.
Yeah.
Actually invented by the Americans, who now think that they have reinvented it. They've forgotten their own past. Obviously, the BBC was hugely dominant, but I think the world of being able to get your stories and your voice out there yourself without going through the major corporations is brand new. I think my understanding is a lot of it is to do, particularly in America, where obviously the huge numbers of listeners and therefore the huge number of advertisers, it's the advertisers don't get it at the moment, but I think that will change. I'm sure that will change. Oh, this is a nice one from Blue Tangerine. Do you have a favorite episode?
I don't. It's like choosing a favorite child.
Oh,
I couldn't possibly. Right now, I think my favorite thing is the episode I've just finished editing, like 10 minutes before this call. I was editing the transcript for the next episode of Remnants, which is my currently airing show, and I'm really excited about it. Which yeah, but that tends to be the thing for me. It's like my favorite thing is the thing that I've just done or that I'm just about to do. And yeah, I'm quite excited. I've got quite a lot of energy for the thing I'm working on right now. But yeah, I couldn't pick a favorite episode overall. That it feels like picking a favorite child, like I said.
so when can we hear Remnants?
So Remnants is already airing. You can find it wherever you listen to podcasts. So yeah, we're episode 13 is about to go out to Patreon supporters.
Oh, right.
So
Right.
yeah.
So just asking, are there, oh, sorry, it's just moved. So that obviously you enjoy working alone.
Yeah.
But are there times that you wish you had more of a team around you? I know you sort of touched on the sort of control thing, but are there times, do you see a time perhaps in the future
Yeah,
of
I mean,
working with others?
I would love to. It's quite complicated because I have a specific style and standard I'm asking for now, and that can be challenging because of aforementioned funding issues. Can be a contributing factor in this kind of thing. But I would really love to work with other people. In particular, I'd like to work with a director who isn't me, because I've really enjoyed that. The couple of opportunities I've had to do voice acting where I've been directed by somebody have been really exciting and great, and I've had such good fun. And so that would be something that I would really like to do. And also because I think that having a separate director from a writer can really do great things for your script. I would love to work with a musician who isn't me as well. I think that would be fantastic. Yeah, there are absolutely times, especially because there's only so much that people in your life like can stand to hear about the little people that you've made up. But if you're working on a project together, then they're your little people that you share. But when you're your own person, so like, oh, I'm really excited about this story problem that I've just solved that is meaningless to pretty much everybody in my life. And that can be it's a little bit disheartening, but like it's fine. I'm never really sad about it. It's just kind of like, oh, I've got all this enthusiasm about this and nobody to share it with.
Oh yeah, you need somebody else to pat you on the shoulder.
Yeah, just get excited about it with you.
Oh, Andre's asking, so actually this is an interesting one. Do you know of any resources to learn sound design that you can recommend? Have you come across any?
I haven't. So I learned sound design by obsessively listening to audio drama and taking frightening amounts of notes. So something I do for fun is I listen to an album and I'll pick out, I've done this all my life, where I'll listen to a musician's album and pick out loads of different elements and try to work out how it's all put together. And I did the same thing with audio drama. And I would try to like rebuild, I would listen to something and be like, oh, how did they do that? How did they achieve that? And rebuild that up from the ground up on my own. But yeah, I think there's loads of people who offer these resources. I cannot think
Mm.
of any off the top of my head. I'm so sorry.
That's all
That's
right.
how I did it.
No, but I think that very learning to listen. I think it's when I've been doing teaching on MAs or other courses, it's about also really learn to listen, whether it's walking the noises down the street, overhearing other people's conversations will help your dialogue, but training the ear to be really forensic about sound and how that sound is made up. So you mentioned the weird cousins. Oliver Morris wants to know which the weird cousins would you recommend that we should be listening to?
For sound design purposes, I always recommend people listen to The White Vault. It's absolutely spectacular sound that I really adore. And those the creators over there at Fool and Scholar also make another show called Vast Horizons for the more sci-fi persuasion, less horror. If you want to get abreast of like what's possible in terms of like how you can play with the format of audio drama and understanding the context that the modern space exists in, I would say you should listen to some of Welcome to Night Vale and
Mm.
the Magnus Archives, because they're so huge in the space that if they've influenced so many up and coming people now, that it's really going to provide you with this context and grounding to understand why a lot of the decisions being made about format that are being made now in indie audio drama in particular are being made. You can trace it back to decisions made in Night Vale and the Magnus Archives. And indie shows that I've been excited about recently are Camlan, which was Ella Watts' show, which is just great.
Can you give us that name again?
Camlan, which is yeah, there you go.
Yeah, can I
Oliver
just say
Morris has
thank
written
you
it down.
so much. There's some lovely people out there who are busy writing these into chat. I can't type and listen to you at the same time. So thank you so much. Just add the chat and everybody can see.
Yes. And another show that's great for sound design stuff is Derelict. It's a great like under the sea soundscape, which is also fantastic sound design. And yeah, I can't think of more off the top of my head. Um, I can put a little list together after the end of this if people would be interested in that.
That would be lovely. If you could send that to Multitrack, that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Yes, this is why I love doing these things. I've just made a long list of things to add to what I'm going to listen to. So this is an interesting one. If you had to choose between recording, editing, or producing, if you could only do one, is that a bit mean? Because you want to do all of them.
Yeah. Of those three, I would probably pick editing, honestly. I really love performing, but I think it's not my strongest skill in the space, and I find that like sound design, editing the soundscape of something is such an immersive experience and really challenging, and I'm always finding new ways to find it challenging, which is really great. So I never feel like I never feel like I'm running into a wall with editing, and sometimes with voice acting I'm like I feel a little bit disheartened, but I never feel like that with sound editing. I'm always excited when I don't know how to do something.
So actually on the voice acting and the editing, so do you stop and listen back to what you've recorded? I suppose what I'm asking is how do you decide when or if you need to do a retake or something? Do you get to the end and then listen back? Do you start?
I do 2 passes at everything that I record, and then line them up next to each other so that I have each take of each line next to each other. I can listen to those as I'm going through. And sometimes I try not to go back and do pickups, but sometimes you have to. And so it's just like, is that incomprehensible? Then I'll re-record it. And sometimes I realize that I'm missing something or I phrased something badly, and then I'll re-record there. But you can get, when you're the only person doing these things, you can get stuck in a loop of just infinitely doing that, which can really be a problem.
And I have to say, I do quite a lot of exec producing, and sometimes with directors coming new to audio drama, that just because you can retake and retake and retake doesn't mean that you should. And that very often when you go back and listen, you realize that your first take was splendid, and there is no need. I think that's yes, that's interesting when it's just you and there's nobody else listening. B's asking, how much do you think about the visuals when writing for audio? And I'm just going to add to this, so you write the script.
Yeah.
Do you ever write the sound into the script at the time when you're writing the dialogue? There are two schools of thought. I come from a school of direction where I push my writers to think about sound, find ways of articulating the sound and writing it into the text. But because you're also the designer, do you write it in? How do the two run in parallel, if that makes sense? Because there is a school of directors who don't want the writers to go anywhere near the sound. And to me, I'm sorry if any of you are out there listening, that seems to me daft.
So I found that I'm writing the sound in more and more, the more confident I get as a sound designer, and the more important it is for the story that I'm telling. I find that sometimes like the sound environment for something comes to me first, and then I'm writing what's happening in that space. And the sound is so often part of the conversation. The way that like movement is in theatre and in film, the sound is like integral for me and how I'm sound designing a space. And I have that luxury of because I'm doing both, that I can move backwards and forwards between it. And I have a degree of flexibility with how much I'm including and not including. I find it's different across different projects quite dramatically, even though it's always only me. You wouldn't think that there was that space, but there's quite a lot of difference between each project I'm working on, how much sound design makes it into the script in that first pass.
That's really interesting. Hero's asking, considering how many hats you're wearing, plus time marketing, promoting, and you also mentioned working while you're creating. So I think this is a really good, if you don't mind answering this one, is sort of how do you manage work-life basis? How do you keep yourself sane? How do you?
Well, for a long time, to be really blunt, I didn't. When I was making Spirit Box Radio, I mentioned earlier that the reason I made Not Quite Dead was because I was feeling really kind of low about a project that I was making. That project was Spirit Box, and it was because I was just working all of the time. I would get up out of bed and I would start working on the show, and I'd be working on the show in some way or form until I went back to bed, and I would like see my housemates and get out for a walk. But you have to make it a priority. Is the only way you're ever going to have work-life balance. When you're working from home, when you're working from yourself, there is no limit being imposed on you on how much you can work, apart from the limit that your body gives you. And you don't want to get to a point where you have made yourself ill. And it's really easy to do. So from the beginning, I would say that you should be making it a priority and making yourself stop. Because if you don't rest, you're never going to be your best. So like you're harming your ability to work by pushing yourself that much. So you have to make it a priority to give yourself space and time to give yourself downtime. Otherwise, you're just never going to create. I find that the most important part of my writing process is stopping and going for a walk. So I really prioritize that in my days. I get out and go for a walk or sit in a park for at least an hour every day, because I can't take my laptop with me and I'm away from it. And I find that's really, really important for solving story problems. Whenever I'm stuck on something, if I go for a walk, I've fixed it by the time I get back. But it's just giving yourself that space to stop and making it a priority. You just have to make it a priority. There's no arguing about it. And that's the only way you can do it. It's the only way I've found just to do it is like to literally schedule it in and force yourself to stop.
Again, thank you for your honesty on that. And I think this leads into something that somebody's asked about. So when you take this time out, you talked about problem solving, but I think it's Via's asking, is that also a time when the next idea comes and leaving space for the next idea?
Kind of. So normally my projects start when I'm doing something else. So I'll be working on one thing, and I'll be like, I'll get an idea for a scene or a moment, and I'm like, that doesn't belong in this story. You're from something else, and I don't know what you're from. And I would like to put you to the side, and I'll just give myself the space to write that down and do whatever it wants me to do, and then leave it alone and then come back to it. So yeah, I find that most of my ideas come from stuff that isn't fitting in a story that I'm already working on, and I go back and I look at it and think, what's actually the anatomy of this thing that I've just made here? And then that's where my ideas come from. Or I'm watching something and I'm like, I really wish that I could have done this because I'd have done it like this. And then in your head, you're like, yeah, that's just a different thing, isn't it? And then I end up doing that, and it bears
Yeah.
almost no relationship to the thing that inspired the first thought. So
But again, it's about leaving that space, whether it's standing at the bus stop or watching something else. I'm very well aware of the time, so we are going to finish in a minute. If you don't mind answering this one, Eira, was your master's degree related to what you do now?
kind of. I did a master's degree in creative writing and focused on writing novels. So it is kind of related. So yeah.
Yes, yeah, it is. I think that's it. I'm very well aware of the time. Eira, thank you so much for sharing. It was absolutely fascinating. Can I thank everybody for joining us and for your questions, and also thanking Jessie and Laura for helping organize this, because actually chairing one of these things, and then they're brilliant at helping organize it and things. And I think that's it. So thank you again so much. And if the chat is there so people can see, and I'm just looking at this, the multi-track will collect up. This is being recorded, and so possibly if people want some more information. And just to say again that your shows are on Rusty Quill, and you also have a very good website. So that's another way, and it's Hanging
Sloth.
Hanging Sloth. Okay, I'm going to ask
like the animal.
last. Why? I'm sorry. I've been. We talked
it's
last week, and I forgot to ask you.
It's a really brief story. So I went to Chester Zoo in 2019, and and they just got a sloth, and I was really excited. I was telling my friend about it, and I was like, oh, and I thought I wasn't gonna be able to see it. I'd stood next to this enclosure for 15 minutes. It hadn't been showing up. The zoo was closing. I was like, I'm gonna leave without seeing this sloth. I'm gonna be really disappointed. And I turned around, and there it was hanging there. And she went, it had hung itself. And I went, no, it was hanging, because they hang. It's a hanging sloth. And she went, I thought you meant it had hung itself. I was like, oh my God, that's awful. That's an awful thing to say. And then as a joke, she said, Hanging Sloth Studios sounds like a production company. And I was like, oh yeah,
they are
I
rather
made one.
Yes, but I have to say, Eira, it's been an absolute pleasure meeting you through doing this. So thank you, Multi-Track, for putting us together. And Sloth-like is the last thing that you are. I find your energy and your creativity and your imagination are absolutely extraordinary. And it's so, yes, you're absolutely not Sloth-like. Right, I'm going to end it. Thank you so much, everybody. And there is, I think, one or two more of these sessions. If you don't know much about Multi-Track, do go and look at their website. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.